I rise to reflect on the first anniversary of the October 7 terrorist attacks, the Hamas terrorist attacks, and express my enduring support for the people of Israel and the Australian Jewish community. Like many of my parliamentary colleagues, I was deeply moved at last night's commemorative event held at the Embassy of Israel in Canberra to mark the first anniversary of those deadly October 7 attacks. It was a solemn gathering and a moment of reflection to honour the more than 1,250 innocent people, Israelis, predominantly Israelis, but also people from Argentina, from Brazil, Canada, Chile, France, Germany, Mexico, Nepal, Russia, Thailand, and, sadly, an Australian, who were brutally murdered, the most significant loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust in World War II. I thank the Ambassador, Amir Maimon, for inviting us to his home to join him and his staff, his family, and members of the Australian Jewish community for such a moving and difficult occasion of mourning. As was evident last night, and in vigils held right across the country and the world, the horror of October 7 has by no means diminished. Hamas's massacre of 1,250 civilians, including the kidnapping of over 250 people, of which 101 remain in captivity, 2 of which are children, is unforgivable. Innocent people, many of them children, were victims of acts of senseless violence, rape, torture, mutilation, burnings, and murder. Our governments, like that of all right-thinking nations of the world, have condemned the attacks by Hamas on Israel 1 year ago, and we condemn them now. There are no reasons that can be given to justify such acts of such callous murder. Barbarism is one way I would describe it. There is no context in which what happened on October 7 is excusable. Our government proudly stands with Israel, and it will always stand with Israel. This is because standing with Israel is part of who we are as the Australian Labor Party. And let us not forget the role of H.V. Evatt, Labor's Minister for External Affairs in the Chifley government, as he was one of the architects of the 1947 United Nations Partition Plan. Doc Evatt's work leading those negotiations as chair of the ad hoc committee on the Palestinian question and later as president of the UN General Assembly was instrumental to the formation of the modern state of Israel, and he considered it as his greatest achievement while in office. When Prime Minister Bob Hawke welcomed the Israeli president to Australia in 1986, he rightly observed, and I quote, "The friendship between our countries goes back to the foundation of the modern state of Israel." Since its modern foundation as a sovereign state, Labor has celebrated Israel's many successes as a thriving democracy in the region. A democracy where civil rights, women's rights, LGBTIQA+ rights are respected and upheld. We have celebrated the wonderful contribution its peoples have made to Australia. It saddens me that there are some in this place particularly those in the crossbench and the Australian Greens political party who have sought to cause division in our community on this issue. Some have encouraged people, protesters, to attend rallies where words of hatred are spoken, where symbols of terror are displayed. Some have attended these demonstrations themselves, getting on stages and speaking in ways that seeks to divide Australians rather than uniting each and every one of us. All the while, some have chosen to peddle misinformation, to exploit genuine concern in our community over the situation in the Middle East, simply for political gain through their anti-Israel rhetoric. One common piece of misinformation peddled by those is that Australia is supplying weapons to Israel. Any suggestion that Australia has supplied weapons to Israel is simply false. The Department of Defence has confirmed repeatedly that Australia has not supplied weapons to Israel. And that distinction also worth mentioning, since the Hamas-Israel conflict began and for at least for the part of the 5 years. And we have seen repeated attempts by some senators, by some from the Australian Greens Party, in estimates pursuing these mistruths. And yet the Greens continue to push this false narrative to create more tension. This type of behaviour must be called out and it must stop. It must stop because words do matter. What we say in this place matters. We are being watched and listened to by millions of Australians. And yet some do listen, as they probably are tonight, into the Senate, watching what the leaders of their community, that is us, the members who are elected, we are leaders of our community, say about this very issue. And there are some whose mission it is to inflame division in our community. And I hate to say that, but it is simply true. Those people do not belong in this place. But we do live in a democracy and we have to respect each other about how we get here in this place. But it is a message worth saying publicly and proudly that people who do come into this place, who are elected to make decisions on behalf of the community, have some level of responsibility, and they need to look at how they conduct themselves in this chamber. Because language of division, language of hate, has a very real effect outside these walls. I condemn in the strongest possible terms the rise of anti-Semitism in our country and those who encourage it. It breaks my heart that the Australian Jewish community have been and continue to be subjected to such hateful prejudice. And people hiding behind the fact that we're not calling them anti-Semites or Semitism, but we're going to call them anti-Zionists or Zionists. Using words, trying to be clever, being smart about the debates that occur and the discourse that is happening right now, but picking and choosing words so that technically they're not a racist, but we know that there are a lot of people in this place who are using racist motives because of their deep hatred for Jewish people. A people whose history has been so characterised by persecution by others should feel safe in a country like ours. I mean, Australia's built about harmony. We embrace multiculturalism, unless you're Jewish. Is that what we're trying to say to people in the Jewish community? A country of multiculturalism, of tolerance, a country of peace. That's who we are as Australians. There is no place in our community for anti-Semitism, hate speech or any kind of racism. The Jewish community in our country are proud Australians. who have contributed so much to our way of life. Just in the same way that my parents came from Italy, who've made sacrifices for their children, and guess what? You know, people like me, my brother and others in my family who've benefited from the sacrifices of my parents in the same way that many Jewish mums and dads and their grandparents have done for their next generation, for their kids, who are also now members of the federal parliament. Something that would be unimaginable for families like mine and others in this place. Australia is the lucky country, and it should stay that way. And like every Australian, they have the right to live their lives without fear. This is not to say that people don't have a right to protest and express their views. Of course they do. That's what living in a democracy is all about. Democracies like Australia. Democracies like the State of Israel. That is what it's all about. But in exercising such rights comes responsibilities. It is incumbent on those who do that they do so in a respectful and law-abiding manner, and in a way that does not incite hatred or violence. Because today we might discuss the issues in the Middle East, but tomorrow there'll be another issue. We've always got to have a long-term outlook on terms of how we conduct ourselves in public. Our government will continue to advocate for a peaceful solution to the situation in the Middle East. But in doing so, you can only do it where both sides also recognise each other's borders. And that is something that also is worth noting in this debate. There are those in the region, in the Middle Eastern region, who do not want peace. Not all, but there are most, I think, who don't. Those in the region who do not respect the rights of others to exist. Our government regards many of these organisations as terrorist organisations. They are Hamas and Hezbollah. But in condemning them and those who support them, we must not overlook the role of Iran in facilitating their trade in terror. Iran has a lot to answer for. Sponsoring these terrorist organisations, using them as proxies for the war, and rather than building peace in the region, innocent civilians are dying, their own citizens and many others in neighbouring countries. Israel has a right to defend itself. It has a right to defend itself against terror and those who practice it. Israelis have the right to sleep safely in their beds, to gaze upon a sky that isn't littered with rockets. The 101 hostages that remain in captivity have the right to return to their families, to live a life of peace, as does the many, many Palestinians. But there is no solution to this conflict other than a two-state solution. But this solution can only come about through the elimination of terror and those who practice it. It is my hope to one day see an Israeli state and a Palestinian state side by side, where the citizens of each of their respective countries can live in peace and with dignity, respecting each other's borders. And as we mark 1 year since the October 7 attacks, we pause to remember the many innocent victims, call for the release of all hostages, stand in solidarity with the vibrant Australian Jewish community, and continue to pray for peace in the region.